Vampires have always fascinated me. Whether in films or games, their gothic allure and unquenchable thirst for blood have captivated my imagination. Beyond Castlevania, I didn't encounter many vampire-centric games during my youth. At least, not until I stumbled upon gems like Vampire the Masquerade and Blood Rain in the early 2000s. However, it was Soul Reaver that truly ensnared me, drawing me into the compelling world of the Legacy of Kain series. From there, I ventured back to experience the original Blood Omen and eagerly consumed its sequels, including Soul Reaver 2 and Legacy of Kain Defiance. But then, silence. For nearly 2 decades, the series lay dormant until remasters for Soul Reaver 1 and 2 were announced earlier this year. To sweeten the deal, Sony added Blood Omen to the PlayStation Classics collection, and to my surprise, Blood Omen 2 followed suit, both complete with a Platinum trophy. Naturally, I couldn't resist diving back into Nosgoth. So how well have these games held up against the test of time, and what does it take to achieve their Platinum trophies? Let's dive into the shadowy world of Nosgoth to find out. To start, I think it is essential to note that Blood Omen 1 and 2 on the PS5 are not remasters or remakes in any way. They are, for better or worse, emulations of the originals, and the only new features added were by the emulator. These features are small but helpful, such as the ability to create a save state whenever you want, some display settings, and the ability to rewind the game by a few minutes if you need to. The save states in particular can be pretty helpful, especially for a game like Blood Omen 1, which only has manual saving as an option at save points. This does mean though that the actual games have not been touched at all, and there have been no graphical updates apart from the emulator's upscaling of the resolution. I have no issues with this, however. I am more than happy to play older games regardless of how they look, but I think it's important to point out that these are old games with old graphics and even older control schemes, and if that is something that can put you off a game, then you should be aware of it going in. The Legacy of Kain Blood Omen is a PlayStation 1 game where you play as Kain, a young nobleman who is ambushed by brigands and killed within the opening 5 minutes of the game. Resurrected as a vampire, he embarks on a quest for vengeance. And after achieving this bloody task, he begins to look for a cure for his ailment, and is told that to achieve peace he must cleanse the pillars of Nosgoth. These are 9 magical stone structures that are linked to the health of the world, and they have been corrupted by grief and madness in the wake of the death of one of the pillars' guardians, a woman named Ariel. This task, naturally, involves murdering all of the remaining corrupt guardians to cleanse the pillars. I love this story, and although it might sound like your typical dark fantasy tale, it sticks with me because of its characters. The Legacy of Kain series has an amazing cast, and Kain in particular is so well written, with his internal monologues throughout Blood Omen being brilliantly performed. I don't know if I will ever tire of the cruel laugh that Kain does when you get the combo timing right, or his victorious shout of Ve Victus. The journey Kain goes on, and his gradual shift and view of his condition is still one of my favourite game tales. It's a shame then that such good voice acting is drowned out by the myriad of sound-related issues this game has. Poor mixing often means that dialogue is quieter than the background music, so it's hard to tell what is actually being said, and repetitive use of the same sound effects, often repeating one straight after the other, can be jarring at best, but annoying at worst. The gameplay for Blood Omen is reminiscent of old Zelda titles, with a top-down perspective of Kain as you explore Nosgoth's many caves and dungeon areas. In these locations, there are a ton of secrets to be found, however, solving them is often a matter of just finding the hidden switch. Combat isn't particularly inventive either, with you and your enemies standing next to each other, swinging your swords, and moving backwards slowly to avoid getting hit. As you progress, you do unlock more options, but they never mix up the gameplay too much. There are multiple weapon types that Kain can unlock that do slightly different things, like the mace that lets you stun enemies briefly so you can drain their blood, healing you and killing them, or the twin axes called Havoc and Malice that give you access to a spinning whirlwind attack if you get the attack combo timing down, but stops you from using any magic or items while they're equipped. These are fun diversions, but 9 times out of 10, the basic sword or the upgraded one you get later in the game are the best options. You also gain access to other spells and items you can use as you explore too, like spells to charm and take control of enemies' minds, or to drain all the blood from everyone in a localized area. You can transform into a wolf, which lets you move faster, or turn into a regular human man to let you sneak through towns unbothered by guards. The items that you have are little fun things too, throwables that implode enemies or dissolve them into acid, and these are usually the quickest and honestly most fun way to deal with enemies, but these powerful items are limited use consumables that you can only pick up while you're exploring. Like the Zelda games it seems to take inspiration from, exploration is well rewarded, with some spells being hidden away, completely unneeded for progression, or health and magic bar upgrades that make your journey easier. Different abilities or weapons let you unlock new areas too. The axes let you cut down trees to reach hidden paths, or the mist form transformation lets you walk across water or through fences. There are 100 different secrets to find in the game, including some that are hidden behind the phases of the moon in the game's day and night cycle, which will lead to whole hidden dungeons. Unfortunately, as cool as it is to find these areas, they can be quite repetitive to go through, and although the main story dungeons are all quite differently thematically and visually, they are very similar in actual content. I love Blood Omen, even now, but especially after replaying it, I can see that it is despite of its gameplay, not because of it. I found towards the end of the game that I wanted to try and skip most of the combat encounters unless I was starting to lose too much health and needed a top up of blood, because unless I had a full mana bar or an excess of items, fighting enemies just wasn't that fun. Trying to stand slightly off center from an enemy or just far enough away that I could hit them without eating hits myself was boring. I'm sure this is just a side effect of the age of the game, but even the boss fights often boil down to chasing someone from one end of a room to another, getting a couple of hits in, and then repeating that. And as someone who loves old school Zelda games like Link to the Past, I do wish they had been more inventive in their boss fights. My biggest issue with Blood Omen 1 though, is loading screens. If I was playing the game on my PlayStation 1, with it reading from a CD and a memory card, I could have understood and been more patient with them. But on a digital emulation of a game that came out in 1996, why are there loading screens? More frustrating than the loading screens between areas is the loading screen to go into your menu. You need to switch weapons fairly often to get around Nosgoth, which means sitting between two multiple second-long loading screens before you get back to the game itself. I hated this so much, and I still don't understand why the emulation needed to keep this. Blood Omen 2 is by many fans considered to be the lowest point in the series. Set 400 years after Blood Omen, it explores a historical timeline created by the events at the end of Soul Reaver 2. 200 years after Kain's choice at the end of Blood Omen 1, he is defeated by the Sarafan, an order of vampire hunters that has been a major force in the world of Nosgoth. Thought to be dead, he awakens 200 years later in the city of Meridian, and joins a vampire resistance against the ruling Sarafan armies, and much as before, must hunt and kill his way through the city to have his revenge. Between Blood Omen 1 and 2, both Soul Reaver games were released, with a focus on tight writing and narrative. However, Blood Omen 2 was created by a different team at Crystal Dynamics, being made simultaneously with Soul Reaver 2. This goes some way in explaining the broad differences between the two Blood Omen titles. Blood Omen 2 focuses a lot more on action gameplay and combat than narrative and puzzles. Combat in Blood Omen 2 is still a little bit janky. It's an early PS2 game after all, but when compared to its predecessor, it is a huge improvement. Kain feels stronger now, and combat feels more fun and fluid than it did before. It is a small dance of blocking, dodging and striking. Hitting the L1 button in time with the enemy's attacks will block them, with the exception of red glowing unblockables which you need to dodge. Blocking attacks fills up a bar that can be used for specific vampiric abilities that Kain can unlock. Your melee attacks start with just Kain's claws, but when you kill an enemy they will drop their weapon, which you can then pick up and use. Although the weapons themselves don't differ much in the way they are used, they do have slightly different damage values and offer an improvement over your basic claws. Frustratingly, however, these weapons break after repeated use. Weapon durability, where you lose the weapon completely, is not a mechanic I'm particularly fond of, but the weapons in Blood Omen 2 are so basic and so plentiful that it actually isn't too much of an issue. Boss fights are where the combat really shows off though, with each boss fight not just being a drawn out slog of blocking and attacking like in Blood Omen 1. Each of the game's bosses has multiple phases, which usually involve some sort of puzzle to figure out before you beat them down. They aren't ever super complex, like one fight has you use your mist form to sneak underneath where a boss is standing to turn on a furnace and set him on fire, but they are fun and they do mix things up. As improved as combat is, there are so many enemies to fight though that it does become repetitive. Especially towards the end of the game, where the enemies block so often that the best way to kill them is to wait and block until you can use one of your unblockable attacks to actually kill them. The puzzles in Blood Omen 2 now also rely a lot more on the dark gifts that Kain earns, with there being areas for stealth, switches to activate telepathically, or innocence to mind control to do your bidding. Which would be great, if they weren't often pretty simple too. Pushing a box somewhere or flipping a switch to open the door. Much like combat, it was nice at first, coming straight after the first game, but by the end of it, the puzzles felt too repetitive and too simple to keep my interest for long. Being 6 years and a whole console generation later, Blood Omen 2 is obviously the better looking of the games, and it actually still holds up pretty well. There are a few instances of graphic clipping on character models, and I love that Kain always looks like a pissed off cat whenever he sees an enemy because it looks a bit ridiculous. But the art direction is good, the steampunk inspired Meridian has a variety of locales to travel through, with each chapter having a distinct theme. However, again, the actual moment-to-moment exploration is often filled with repetitive looking rooms and alleyways that can leave you feeling a bit bored. Where Blood Omen 2 truly fails though is its narrative. Kain is still excellent, and is still the same arrogant lordling he was in the original, but even with Simon Templeman's excellent voice work, the story just doesn't hit. It feels so shallow, and the world feels out of place with the rest of the series, even if there are some recurring characters. I never really felt dragged along by the story's twists as I did in Blood Omen, and it is a shame. The dialogue feels weaker too, less flowery, less dramatic, with the characters feeling flat and dull. Overall, Blood Omen 2 doesn't even add that much to the overarching story in my opinion. I think it might have been planned to explore the villains of the story that were revealed at the end of Soul Reaver 2, but it doesn't do a good job of that.
Now we are divided and dying.
Then rouse yourself. Make more of our kind.
This game is also very buggy. I suffered from multiple crashes and audio bugs throughout the time I spent with this game. Sometimes the sound effects for combat would just stop, so blocking gave no audio feedback at all. Certain cutscenes had their audio completely desync from the scene by enough that I didn't hear the end of certain conversations because gameplay would restart and the audio would just end. The last chapter, and more specifically the last boss, crashed on me 8 times before I was finally able to finish the game. The crash always happened in the transition to the last phase of the fight. This was so frustrating to play through and soured what was already an experience I felt had overstayed its welcome. The trophies for both games are relatively short lists, and they are relatively short games. Blood Omen 1 took me around 10 hours to get the platinum, and Blood Omen 2 took me about 12. Blood Omen 1 is probably the more annoying of the two lists, however, as it has a lot more missables and things to look out for. As I mentioned before, there are 100 in-game secrets hidden throughout Nosgoth, hidden behind secret switches or hidden paths, and you have to find at least 50 of these for the trophy Nothing Escapes My Notice. This will help you a lot of the way to some of the other trophies too, like a Deadly Arsenal for finding all of the weapons, armour, spells and objects. Most of these are needed for story progression, but not all of them are, so you will need to search them out, often having to backtrack once you have unlocked new abilities. It will help to unlock The Sky Is Mine to Command for finding all of the bat beacons, which are fast travel points so you don't have to walk everywhere. You will also need to kill 1,000 people, feed on 500 of those, and mutilate 250 with items for the trophy Ve Victus. The main thing to pay attention to with these secrets though are the moon phases. Blood Omen, as I said, has a day and night cycle, and each night has a different moon phase. It takes around 15 minutes for a day to pass, and there are 8 moon phases. There are specific areas that will not open unless it is a full moon. The first of these is near the end of the game, after you have beaten the bosses of Dark Eden. There is a gate that is locked right next to a bat beacon, and when the full moon opens the gate it will give you access to a cave where you can earn the lightning spell. This was actually the last spell I needed for that trophy, and when I got to the end of the game I realised I'd forgotten to go into the cave, so I had to wait almost the whole 2 hours before full moons to enter. It sucked. The other place you need the full moon to enter is the Lost City. Just north of Vorador's mansion, you'll need to walk across a large lake in mist form to another area. In this area is an island with a teleporter, and the teleporter will take you to the temple that will open on the full moon. And actually contains about 20 of the 50 secrets you need inside it, and like 30 of each of the items in the game. It's really worth doing, even if it wasn't for the trophy you'll get, called Ancient Secrets. Here's a fun fact. Blood Omen came out in 1996, but it wasn't until 2010 that a secret area called HMCS Bitter was discovered in the game's files, and the legitimate way to get there in the game wasn't figured out until 2020. This is such a cool secret in the game, so naturally there's a trophy for visiting this secret location. To earn the trophy, She's a Fine Vessel, you must find 4 hidden switches around the world and hit them with the Energy Bolt spell. The first of these is in the first village you enter, called Zeigstall, another is outside the entrance to Malek's Bastion, the third is southeast of the city Willendorf, and the last one is just outside the castle in the Land of the Nemesis. I would definitely recommend using a guide to find these as they are incredibly well hidden. Once you've done them, you will find a secret entrance at the back of the house in Vassabund that will take you to the ship. The last trophy to watch out for, which I initially thought was bugged, is the first trophy you can earn in the game, but alas, it was for naught. The trophy says to cheat death and survive the ambush, so I thought this was just for completing the introduction and becoming a vampire, but there's a bit more to it than that. What you need to do is defeat all of the bandits outside of the tavern, then go into the only house that you can enter and die there. Then the trophy will pop. Defeating these bandits outside can be quite hard as there's quite a lot of them, so I would recommend waiting for nightfall first when Kain is much stronger. Once you have all of these trophies, you will earn the Platinum Trophy, Ruler of Nosgoth.
End it! Now!
Blood Omen 2's list is much less involved than the first one, with only a few trophies that I would consider missable. The first of these is to defeat 15 enemies with stealth. The game gives you plenty of opportunities to use your mist form to sneak up on enemies and kill them, but it is worth knowing that you need to do it 15 times for the trophy Mist Assassin. You will also need to finish 2 chapters using only your claws or dark gifts. I don't know if picking up the weapon voids the trophy, but I didn't risk it, and I got this in the first 2 chapters when they were easier. You will unlock When All Else Fails when you finish the second chapter. Another missable trophy is to pick up 10 unique weapons. This is only missable as some of the enemies and the weapons they drop stop appearing later in the game, and obviously this counteracts the trophy for not using weapons. Also, bear in mind there are 2 types of longsword that look similar, so just pick up and break as many weapons as you can, just to be sure. Throughout the game, there are hidden caches called lore boxes that when you open them will fill a purple bar next to Kain's health. This bar is also filled when you feed on enemies, and when the bar is filled up, Kain gets a health increase and the bar resets. Fill this bar 9 times for the Lore of Kain trophy. Finding 30 of these boxes, or the boxes that give you a weapon buff, will also get you the Ancestral Gifts. I earned this by around chapter 6, so maybe like halfway through the game. Lastly, there is a trophy called Ha! Got One, which is for killing a rat. There are tons of rats in Nosgoth, but helpfully there is one pretty much in the first room you start in, so you can get this really early on. Getting all of these will earn you Blood Omen 2's Platinum. At last, Nosgoth will be mine. I am glad that I went back and played Blood Omen 1 and 2. It was a nice trip back to my youth, and it's always fun to revisit a series that you hold dear. Despite my issues with Blood Omen 1 feeling repetitive and having bad combat, I still like the game a lot. The good of its narrative far outweighs its bad. That probably speaks to my taste in media, where a good narrative can cover a multitude of sins for me. Blood Omen 2, however, is actually a fair bit worse than in my memory, and as much as I do like the Legacy of Kain series, Blood Omen 2 is a game I can quite easily recommend skipping unless you really want to play it to experience everything the series has to offer. It just doesn't hold a candle to Blood Omen 1 or the Soul Reaver titles. If you can handle some of the more dated aspects of Blood Omen 1 though, I would definitely recommend it, for the story alone, or at least watch a YouTube synopsis if you think you would struggle with the gameplay. If you are interested though, it is a great time to play both games, as there are Remasters of Soul Reaver 1 and 2 coming in January, and maybe, if I pray hard enough, Defiance will get a remaster too. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this double header of the Blood Omen games. Let me know what you think of the games in the comments, and if you have played any of these before, and until next time, happy hunting.